All right,
Yes,
here we
thank
go.
you.
All right, so thank you very much, Kevin, for the opportunity to present here. And oops, I have to get one other thing adjusted here. Uh, please comments. Okay. All right. The purpose of this presentation is to give an overview of the beef cattle cycle. This topic is one that I think is relevant to owners of any age, herds of any size, and any sector of the beef industry. The the outline for my presentation is shown here. As I mentioned, I'm going to discuss the beef cattle cycle and its current stage, pose the key question of where we stand right now and what happens next, and mention some options that are available for listeners and a little bit of guidance on how to choose an option. Um, so, just one slide from the state of Wisconsin, and I realize this may not be of terrible interest to the audience, but in this state, we have almost 13,000 herds of beef cattle operations where beef cattle are found. 64% of them are less than 20 head of beef cattle. And in fact, this slide shows that the most numerous number of populations are those ranging from 1 to 9. And interestingly enough, from 2002, shown in the light gray bar, to 2022, they have declined in prevalence, while those herd sizes from 20 to 49 have increased. We have about 275,000 beef cows in this state, and so the average number of cows per herd is about 21 cows. A lot of small herds in this state, and this would be true for many states in the country, though not those in the heart of the country where the beef cattle industry is predominant as the economic agricultural industry. So this topic touches on beef cattle operations of all sizes. The topic is the beef cattle inventory cycle. The beef cattle inventory cycle has 4 phases to it. At a cycle high in inventory, there of course is a maximum population of cattle, and in this case, I'm referring to beef and dairy cattle, which is the way our total cattle number is determined in the US. At maximum population size, we have lowest cattle prices. This phase is followed by a liquidation phase where there's a decline in the population size, and associated with the decline in population are increasing prices. The next phase of the cycle is a cycle low in inventory, minimum population size, and which is associated with highest cattle prices. And that phase of the cycle is then followed by the expansion phase of the cycle, where there's increasing population and decreasing prices. And that phase, expansion, takes us back to the beginning, the cycle high in inventory. Shown on this slide is the relationship between beef cow herd size and dairy cow herd size in the US from CattleFax and from USDA from 1950 to the present. In the last 35 years, the dairy cow population has hovered right around 9.2 to 9.4 million cows. And the beef cow population has fluctuated, as is evident by the fluctuations in that inventory red line. Currently, we are at about 28 million beef cows. So we have approximately 3 times as many beef cows as we do dairy cows in this country. I mentioned the dairy cow number because sometimes in dairy-intensive regions of the country, there are comments made about cattle prices being somehow linked to milk prices. And actually, it's not that way. The beef cow herd number dominates in the U.S. beef cattle industry, and its fluctuations have the major effect on supply of cattle and calves for beef production. Shown on this slide is the change in total cattle inventory from 1867 through well, the early 2020s. The yellow dot, I'm sorry, the yellow dot shows the low between adjacent highs in population. And we call that low point a nadir. That's just the definition of a low between two highs. So the yellow dots designate nadirs in the fluctuations of total cattle inventory in the US. On this slide, I have associated the beef cattle, or the total cattle inventory with cattle prices, fed cattle prices from 1867 through 2015. And what I want you to notice is that typically each yellow dot is associated with a peak in fed cattle price. However, exceptions would be 1938, and if I can get a pointer here, do this laser pointer. 1938, which is this dot here, is not associated with a peak, and 1967 is not associated with a peak. But in every other case, a nadir is associated with a price peak. This was the case in 67, in 90, in 2004, and certainly now in 2014. Let's go. I'm sorry, I just wanted to be. Okay. So the cattle inventory is related to cattle prices, and cattle prices are influenced by supply and demand, weather, perspectives in the market, and governmental intervention. With regards to supply, factors that influence supply of cattle are the cow herd size, which influences, of course, calf crop size and feeder cattle available for placement into feedlots, and steers and heifers finished for harvest. Also, carcass weight influences supply, and then there are probably other factors which I've not thought of or listed here. Imported cattle and meat also influence supply of beef in the US, and exported meat, because mainly we export meat. We export very few live cattle. We export about 11% of domestic production into international markets, so that influences our supply in the US. Demand is influenced by domestic consumption, which is influenced by disposable income, retail prices of beef, prices and availability of competing meats like chicken and pork, and consumer attitudes towards those meats. Foreign consumption is influenced by trade policies. One could also say tariffs, monetary exchange rate, and consumer disposable income in those international markets. Drought is a weather factor that it can influence supply. It is possible that severe cold weather during calving season could also be a factor affecting supply. And then market perspectives, like the National Economic Forecast for the economy, or news events or statements by government officials, can influence prices of cattle and beef. All right, shown on this slide is a figure that was developed by the American Farm Bureau Federation and published in early November of this past month. It's a relationship between the percent of the US area that is in drought and our total cattle population inventory. So one can see that the percent of the US cattle area in drought was as low as 10% in 2010 and in 2019, but in 2012 and in 2021, 22, we were over 50% of the US area was in drought. Now, drought is important because it influences the availability of forage to graze, and grazed forage is the cheapest feed source for the beef cow herd. So in those years which were drought years, there is no expansion occurring in total cattle inventory. In fact, this is a deterrent to expansion of the US cattle herd when we are in drought. Shown on this slide is a depiction of all the cattle cycles from 1938 through 2025. And if you look on the x-axis, you'll see that these cattle cycles range from 9 years out to 14 years. The rule of thumb is that the cattle cycle lasts about 10 years. So we are presently in the cattle cycle that started in 2014. We have finished 11 years. We're entering the 12th year of the current cattle cycle. In these cattle cycles, there's a fluctuation in total cattle population. And in the earlier cattle cycles, like 67 to 79, that fluctuation amounted to a change of about 30 million head of cattle. In 79 to 90, again, the change was approximately 30 million head of cattle. Actually, probably 20 million cattle. But now, in recent times, the fluctuations are much more muted. So in 2014 to 2025, our change in total cattle population is on the order of 7 million head. I believe that these cattle cycles will be muted going forward because our market communications are just so extensive and so rapid that I think this influences the social behavior of the cow herd owners with regards to their intentions for expansion and contraction of the herd. All right, why could a cattle cycle still exist after 150 years? Well, our U.S. industry is a segmented industry. It is not an integrated industry, as is true for pork and for poultry. So we have 622,000 cow-calf operations in 2022, according to the Progressive Cattle magazine. Each of those cow-calf operators is an independent decision maker. As you know, they are not organized into any sort of cohesive decision-making strategy. So they each make independent decisions. That is a factor why we still have a cattle cycle. Another factor is that there's a long generation interval involved in producing cattle, a much longer generation interval than is true for broilers or for hogs. I'm going to explain that a bit in the subsequent slide. And then a quick exit is possible from the cattle industry, but a quick entry is not possible because of the capital-intensive nature of cattle operations and the biological timeline for cattle supply. So shown on this slide is my depiction of the biological timeline for cattle supply. On the left-hand side of this is an event where a heifer calf is born. She's eventually bred. She gestates that calf, the progeny is born, her calf is born, and that if it's a heifer calf, that heifer calf could be sent to a feedlot, weaned and sent to a feedlot and finished approximately 9 months later or so. And if this is the case, this animal is harvested about 40 months after her dam was born. On the other hand, this heifer could be retained to increase the cow herd size. So she would be a breeding herd replacement animal, in which case the daughter is bred, her grand progeny is born, that calf is weaned, sent to a feedlot, and that animal is harvested approximately 64 months after the grandmother was born. So there's an offset here of about 24 months involved in taking a heifer from and making the decision about a heifer as to whether she goes to be finished for beef or whether she is retained for breeding purposes. So each of the heifers, in effect, one can think of all of these heifers annually, after they are weaned, someone makes the decision about whether they stay in the herd or whether they are headed out of the herd for beef production. So what's the current phase of the U.S. cattle cycle? And just to tell you, we are awaiting expansion in the current cattle cycle. And here is the evidence for that answer. So this is a display from Cattle Facts of the total cow herd, the U.S. total cow herd, which saw its most recent peak in 2019 at around 31.5 million head. And here, this was a graph that was prepared in early 2025 by Cattle Facts. The actual number of cows on January 1, 2025 was a bit less than 28 million. It's about 27.8 million. And then based upon the assumed retention of heifers, the graph was built assuming that the cattle cycle would reoccur and that the cow herd number would increase in 26 and 27. So this is an example where the concept of the cattle cycle is governing projections in the future. This is a slide depicting weekly fed steer and heifer slaughter. And it shows that in 23 and 2024, the green and the blue lines, fed steer and heifer slaughter was pretty consistent between those 2 years. But in 2025 now, fed steer and heifer slaughter is much less than it was in those preceding 2 years. So this is again a depiction that the supply of cattle available for harvest has declined due to the decline in cow herd numbers that has occurred in the years prior. This is a figure that Daryl Peel from Oklahoma State University generated and published just a few days ago is when I saw it. This is a chart of 12-month moving averages for placements of cattle into a feedlot, into U.S. feedlots, and marketings of finished cattle from U.S. feedlots. And one can see that these placements and marketing numbers mirror the supply of cattle, the cow herd, with the last low in the cow herd being around 2014, and here the low in placements and marketings in about 2016, and then rising in recent years, and in current years now declining placements and declining marketings. Again, the supply of cattle is low. Now, one of the modifying factors in the current U.S. beef situation is that carcass weights have been increasing, especially in 2025. They increased in 24, over 23, and again in 25. The cost of gain is less than the value of gain in current economic situations within the beef industry. So it makes sense that cattle feeders would take these cattle to heavier weights because they can afford to. There's profit associated with doing so. And because the supply of feeder cattle is diminished, this is a way that they can increase the occupancy of their feedlots. That is by holding cattle longer and taking them to heavier weights. I will also say that in the process of doing this, the percentage of prime grading cattle has increased in recent years because fed steers and heifers have been on feed longer than they were in earlier years. So carcass weights modify total U.S. beef production. Total U.S. beef production is not as low as one would expect from the declining calf numbers, cow herd numbers, and calf supply numbers. This is a relationship between total U.S. cattle inventory and beef production. So when we have lows in total cattle inventory, eventually we have lows in beef production. And in the current cattle cycle, although we have a declining supply of cattle available for beef production, our commercial beef production has not declined in a similar manner because we have increased carcass weights. Now, Daryl Peel comments that we will probably see a decline in commercial beef production, a further decline in 2026, and probably a further decline in 2027, because we have not yet started to rebuild the nation's beef cow herd. This is a slide of cow and bull slaughter. And as you can see, we've had our highest values here for cow and bull slaughter were in 2023, then declined in 2024, and even lower in 2025. So as the nation's cow herd has shrunk, there have been fewer cows available to harvest. This has put significant strain on the packing sector of the industry. And as some of you probably know, these declines in cattle available to harvest have resulted recently in news that Tyson is closing one of its large cattle plants in Lexington, Nebraska, and reducing from 2 shifts to one of its plants in Amarillo, Texas. So the supply of cattle is down. This is a slide developed by Neville Spear. It is a relationship between beef cow slaughter rate on the x-axis and the change in beef cow inventory on the left axis. Um, Beef cow slaughter rate would be the annual number of cows slaughtered divided by the population of cows available on January 1. And change in beef cow inventory would be the change in number of cows from a preceding year to the current year, and that number minus 1, and then converted to a percentage. So what the graph shows is that when the beef cow slaughter rate is 9.5%, then this degree of cow slaughter would be associated with a 0% change in cow inventory number. So 9.5% cow slaughter rate would designate stability in the beef cow herd size. In 2024, the slaughter rate was 10.2%. So these would be the most recently available data to calculate slaughter rate on an annual basis. And it says that in 2024, we were still in a bit of a liquidation phase of the beef cattle cycle. When this number drops below 9.5%, then we're in the expansion phase. Cow-calf operators, the cattle cycle is interpreted as follows. When cow-calf operators experience profitability, then they are inclined to want to multiply that profit by increasing the size of their cow herds. So in 2014, you can see here that the profit per cow sent a very solid signal to the industry that there was profitability, and so the cow herd operators increased the size of the beef cow herd thereafter. So cow herd inventory increased thereafter up to this 31.5 million or so. But then money began to be lost in the cow-calf sector. And so liquidation occurred. Liquidation has been going on now for about 7 years. And but currently in 2024, and again, certainly in 2025, a solid signal for profitability in dollars per cow is being sent throughout the industry. And so this signal, we expect, should be the signal that motivates cow herd owners to retain a few more heifers to expand cow herd size. That's the expectation. The situation in 2014, 2015 is explained here on this slide. And the point here is that the situation in 2014, 2015 is different than the situation in 24, 25. This is a slide developed by Daryl Peel at Oklahoma State, who's been a great voice in keeping the cattle industry informed of where we are in the cattle cycle. So this is the relationship between 500-pound steer price, and it peaked in 2014. But it dramatically declined thereafter, unexpectedly rapid decline. And that unexpected rapid decline in wean steer price was attributed to the fact that already in 2014, there were significant numbers of heifers being retained for herd replacements. So the replacement rate shown by the blue line and reflected on the left-hand scale indicated that there were a lot of heifers being retained following 2011. And so when high prices hit on weaned steer calves, there were heifers in the pipeline to generate additional calves in the cow herd, and that replacement rate rapidly increased supply of calves, and so the price dropped. Now in 2023, 2024, the replacement rate is very low. And while we have increased weaned calf prices in 23, 24, and certainly in 25, we don't expect these prices to drop as precipitously in the current cattle cycle as they did in the preceding one, because we're at a different point in terms of replacement heifer retention rate. We're at a low value now, whereas we were at a higher value in 2014. So this is a slide that was developed before 2020, or it was probably at the end of 2024, and it was a forecast for prices for weaned steers, 800-pound feeder cattle, and finished cattle. Now in 2025, our finished cattle prices have far exceeded the 190 value forecasted here. So this graph has not been remade yet with current prices. But it's reflecting that the first point to be made here is that the increase in prices is reflecting where we were in 2022, 2023 in the cattle cycle, and where the peak is expected according to this forecast. Now, when this graph is updated to 2025 prices, there will be sharp increases in all classes of cattle and also in the cutout, though the cutout has not increased as much as cattle prices have. And so consequently, there have been negative margins associated with those involved in the harvest sector of the beef industry. So the cattle cycle carries over into bred cow prices. There is a 96% correlation between fed steer value and average bred cow value. So here in 2024, 2025, we have accelerating prices for bred cows, as many of you would know. And since we haven't started heifer retention yet, probably these prices will continue to go higher. All right, the pricing of cattle also carries over into breeding bull prices. So breeding bull demand is influenced by the economic well-being of cow-calf operators. Bull prices follow feeder calf prices. Bull prices are supported by the salvage values of bulls. So cull bulls now bring approximately $2,000. That's going to elevate the prices paid for yearling bulls and 2-year-old bulls. So demand follows cow herd profitability. Demand increases after buyers have money in their pocket. So what are the implications of an understanding of this beef cattle cycle for future business decisions in the cattle industry? When is the best time to enter the cow-calf sector? Well, the best time to enter the cow-calf sector is when bred cow prices would be lowest, bred heifer prices also. This would occur when one is at the cycle's highest inventory. What's the best time to exit the beef cattle industry? Well, if one is close to retirement or for some other reason wants to exit the industry, the best time to exit would be at the cycle's lowest inventory, which is where we are now. And so there are some very large dispersals occurring and being advertised at this time. What's the optimum strategy for long-term participation in the cow-calf sector? Well, Dr. John Lawrence, now retired from Iowa State University, did a project 10 years ago in which he concluded from their modeling that dollar cost averaging was the wisest strategy for long-term participation. Dollar cost averaging is a strategy where you invest a fixed dollar amount at regular intervals, regardless of the market price. This means you save the same number of replacement heifers, regardless of whether wean calf prices are high or low, aiming to reduce the average cost per cow over time. If one wants to grow one's herd, it is probably best to do that in a long-term planning effort, as opposed to trying to do it in an abrupt fashion, which is an expensive strategy to follow. So the status of the current cattle cycle is that our cow herd inventory is presumably going to show its lowest inventory value as of January 1 of this year, 2025. We will see, though, when USDA publishes its information for January 1, 2026, whether that is actually the case. Earnest heifer retention has not yet begun because there are still quite a few heifers passing into feedlots to be finished, quite a few heifers going through calf auctions this fall. So we don't have a solid signal that heifer retention has yet begun, even though there is a price signal being sent to the cow-calf operators, which could induce them to retain heifers. The minimum beef cow inventory suggests that the peak in cattle values is near 6 to 12 months. Actually, we may have seen the peak in this cycle as of late October, before the announcements by the government of trade relationships with Argentina and Brazil being modified, and before there was talk of a Mexican border opening. If the Mexican border is open to feeder cattle importation, the peak in cattle prices will come sooner. So the shortage of feeder cattle is being offset by heavier finished weights. I was at a conference recently where one of the consultants said that he had done seen a closeout on cattle that were sent to harvest at 1,675 pounds harvest weight. Wow. Bred female values have not yet peaked. This is a slide regarding the importation of feeder cattle from from Mexico. The border was closed to the importation of cattle from Mexico in November of 2024. Then it was briefly reopened in the spring months, and it was reclosed again in June. We import approximately on an annual basis 1.25 million feeder cattle from Mexico. And that supply of feeder cattle is not present now. And so consequently, we have a further shortage in feeder cattle supply for the U.S. production system. This is, of course, is because of the USDA, fortunately, is seeking to reduce the risk of the screwworm fly from entering the U.S. cattle population. So there is much evidence to support the cattle cycle as a macroeconomic concept that explains long-term trends in prices of various classes of cattle. The cattle cycle is a pattern of thought that has value in long-term planning for a cattle business. And I want to say that experiencing the fulfillment of that long-term plan requires a lot of patience, because the cattle cycle moves on this 10-year pace. What will happen to your cattle business when current cattle prices fade away? That's sort of the key question. These prices that we currently enjoy will not be sustained forever. Eventually, heifer retention will occur. When it does, there'll be a further peak in feeder cattle price. But then thereafter, those retained heifers, will begin to produce more calves, and the supply will increase relative to demand, and the prices will come down. So the options for someone in the beef cattle business, in one sense, depends upon what is the horizon of your business. If you are near-term retirement, then what should your exit strategy be, or what should your succession plan be? If you're on the front end of your career in the beef cattle business, or in the midst of it, and you're either getting established or wanting to grow a bit, grow your business, then you're interested in growth strategies. And that has to do with access to land, either through purchase or through renting or leasing, so that a herd could expand. And there are herd lease and herd purchase options available to someone who's wanting to grow their beef cattle enterprise. There may be other ways of adding revenue to the beef cattle enterprise through added value methods, or potentially direct sales of meat. All of that is sort of easier said than done. It takes a long-term plan. My position and my interest in talking to you about this topic is that I aim to be able to help people to centralize and organize their available data so that they can calculate a cost of production for their operation. A cost of production calculation is a means whereby a business person can have an overall view of the performance of their business, and in the process, perhaps recognize where efficiencies could be gained, or places where knowledge is needed. So really, I am interested in helping people organize and utilize their available data, so that they might recognize efficiencies, and they might recognize where they need additional knowledge. There are a whole bunch of financial and technology topics that one could talk about. in the general context of beef cattle production, and a number of those topics are mentioned here. But I contend that one doesn't really know what they should be interested in unless they know where their gaps in efficiencies or their gaps in knowledge exist. And that then sets the agenda for the learning that needs to occur. So I thank you for your time and your attention, and I'll be happy to attempt to answer any questions if you have questions for me. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kevin.
So it's a lot of
Yes, thank you very much. Hey, I appreciate that. One question, if you're feeding feeder cows, feeder, how much runway do you think we have on good fat prices? So if you're buying feeders and fattening them,
Yeah, yeah.
when might I lose my pants?
Well, the answer is that we should, given the number of dollars, the amount of dollars that are involved in buying feeder cattle right now, there needs to be some price risk management strategy employed. And whether that's the use of the futures or options through the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, or whether it's the use of livestock risk protection insurance, those are the options that are available to try and manage risk. I would say that just in the last 6 weeks, fed cattle prices have dropped from $2.40 a pound to around $2.10 a pound. So that's equivalent to about $400 to $450 a head that have been lost already. Whether this carries through to a reductions in feeder calf price is yet to be understood. There have been declines. It is a difficult time right now. So let me go on and think that further reductions in fed cattle price are not so likely. I think we're at the bottom. And I think the fundamentals, despite all the volatility of recent weeks, still show that there is a shortage in the supply of cattle. And when we get past Christmas and New Year's and the beef demand associated with those holidays, there could be some decline in fed cattle prices. But once we get to April again and the so-called thrill of the grill, we'll see a resumption in consumer demand. So I would say that for calves being purchased now and intended for harvest next July or August, there needs to be some price risk management. And that comes at the cost of an insurance premium. But I just think it's the cost of doing business right now because there's too much at risk to go unprotected into the coming year or two.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's just that much risk with these high prices that you should have something. What is the most likely? What is the most broad? What's done the most in the 40 to 50 cow herds? Would that be the insurance, or the CME would be more the larger herds?
Yeah, that would be true. Yeah, there's just not enough cattle in the small herds to really have the equivalent of one contract's worth of feeder cattle. And feeder cattle would be the contract that would be used in the small herds. So livestock risk protection insurance has seen a large increase in its utilization by the beef cattle operators. So LRP would be really the best option for all of the small herds. That kind of insurance is available almost regardless of herd size.
Okay, and is that fairly easy to get?
Yep, there are quite a few vendors, quite a few agents that are selling LRP. They, yep. I know even in this state, which is a small beef state, we still have a number of vendors that are selling the LRP. So it just requires a little bit of checking, I'd say.
Okay. Hey, well, very well. Very, very fascinating. Really appreciate it.